thank you for joining us for today's discussion. I'm so happy to welcome back Stacy Mitchell, Co-Executive Director at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, to talk about a new report examining Amazon's influence over public procurement and its impact on competition, costs, and local economies. Stacy, thank you so much for doing this.
Always nice to be with you, Teddy.
And you know, this is a topic near and dear to my heart because I got my career investigating companies started by looking into for-profit colleges. So this idea that companies are stealing from students or engaging in predation in education is very familiar to me. So I was, the conclusions from the report jumped off the page at me in terms of the cost to students, but maybe we could take a step back. And I would love to know like how you thought of doing this report, like how did it come to be?
We've been aware that Amazon has been making inroads into public sector procurement. And, there's a certain amount of reporting about the stuff at the federal level and about AWS. But they're also, rapidly moving into selling, commercial products to local governments and state governments. And that has really flown under the radar. Like there's been very little attention to it. And of course, Amazon has been pursuing this quietly because I don't think that this is not something they're putting press releases out about, like all of the cities and school districts that they've signed up to buy from them. So we were aware of that. We actually did a report about 6 years ago that looked at a very early contract that Amazon had signed and with a school district that it had then offered nationally. And we sort of found a lot of disturbing things in that contract, and we wrote a report about it. And now, 6, 7 years later, we wanted to go back and say, well, what has happened to the landscape? And so we did information requests to um, a lot of cities, school districts, counties, and state agencies across the country. We ended up with information from about 128 local jurisdictions and about 122 state agencies.
That's amazing. And I want to get into the highlights from the report, but was it hard to get them to cooperate? Because when we've tried to do federal FOIAs, the agencies are very defensive and aggressive with us in, saying, hey, no, these are sensitive documents. We won't turn any of it over. When it comes to the Jedi procurement and things like that. We had a really hard time getting those documents. We ended up getting some and found some corruption in that process, but it's really hard work. And I'm curious if the cities and states are more, forthcoming or if it was a struggle.
My colleague Kennedy Smith, who did all of this information gathering with help from Nazar Mohammed, an intern with us. They looked like they were in the trenches of a war when this was going on. I mean, it was pretty rough. I mean, some cities were very forthcoming and very cooperative and very transparent. Some cities, there's a few places that even publish all of this online, comprehensively. There are a number of places that publish stuff online that's not comprehensive, we found, that actually omits a lot of things. But, it's a whole spectrum. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have places that stonewall, that say it's going to cost you an enormous fortune for us to provide this information. One example was the city of New York. We went to the comptroller's office and they said, we can't provide this information. You would have to FOIA every one of the city's 62 agencies. And we started doing that, and like almost none of them actually replied. And it was just like, this is too much work. And so we had to kind of abandon that avenue. But it was a lot of back and forth. And we were asking them not only how much did you spend with Amazon, but also have you signed on to a number of these group purchasing contracts that we're familiar with? And so we were also trying to extract that information. We had trouble. I will say we also looked at the federal level. So there's a section of this report that provides an overview of what Amazon is doing in federal procurement, which is quite disturbing as well. And there, I mean, we had like the USDA, which put on this whole show for small businesses. They invited all these small businesses to come to a thing about selling to the federal government, and it was all run by Amazon. It was all about you should get on Amazon's platform. And when we asked them, how much are you uh, spending with Amazon, they basically refused to tell us.
Wow. I mean, I mean, I'm not surprised, to be honest. Normally I would think maybe I'd be surprised, but at this point, sadly, I am not. Now, you had there were some very disturbing findings in this report. Can you share with us some of the ones that, what really stood out to you, and, what was your takeaway from the investigation?
Yeah, so we found that almost all of the local governments that we got information from were spending money with Amazon. There are a couple of exceptions, and some that were spending very little, but most local governments, cities, schools, and counties were spending with Amazon. Based on that data, we estimate that in 2023, local governments in the US spent $2.2 billion with Amazon on commercial products. So this is outside of the AWS contracts. This is just, office supplies, school supplies, cleaning supplies, that kind of thing. And that's up by, sort of it's a fourfold increase from 2016, our estimate from 2016. So it's growing quite rapidly. The other couple of things that I think really stand out is that we found that Amazon has persuaded local governments to abandon competitive bidding and abandon fixed price contracts and instead sign on to these contracts with Amazon that specify dynamic pricing. So, traditionally the way procurement works is that, you put out an RFP and you have multiple bidders and they include a price list. Like these are the prices you will lock in for the duration of this, say 3-year contract. And that ensures that you get appropriate volume discounts, that you're getting fixed prices in exchange for your business, for the, for the city's business. And it's completely transparent. Like anybody can go down to City Hall and say, okay, who bid on this? What prices did they offer, and who got the award of the contract? And instead, schools and cities are shifting to these these contracts that specify dynamic pricing that are totally not transparent. And we found that there is functionally no difference between an employee of a school district that has one of these contracts logging on to Amazon Business and buying supplies, and you or I logging on to Amazon Business and buying supplies. It's the exact same price. It's like whatever the price is that day is what the price is.
So they get no discount by doing the RFP effectively, or anything like that.
No, this happens. I should say Amazon has a platform called Amazon Business that it's their corporate and sort of institutional and government buyer facing platform. It is, as far as we can tell, just a different sort of skin on the Amazon consumer platform. Essentially, it works the same way. It appears to be run by the same warehousing and logistics system, and it appears to have basically the same prices. We didn't really find any particular difference between Amazon Business and the consumer site. Uh, there are, some opportunities to occasionally get like a volume discount or to do like a custom quote if you're buying a lot. But in the data, we can see that it's very rare that a school or a city actually was able to use those features. So it's like a very minority, very small share of the actual purchases. For the most part, they are just paying whatever the price is on Amazon Business, and that is very often the same exact price that's on the Amazon consumer site. And I should say that Amazon Business, you don't actually have to be a business or an institution to buy. You can go set up an account and buy on Amazon Business as an individual.
What, um, how did you get so you got the contracts, but then how, if it's dynamic pricing, how did you find out, that they're pricing different things to different people, and you're paying way less for erasers in one municipality than another?
Yeah, so we had of all the data we got back from the 128 local jurisdictions, there were 23 that provided the data in enough detail that we could see the item that they were buying, how much they were paying for it, and we had the ASIN, the Amazon product number for that item. And so we could do apples to apples comparisons across those 23 cities and school districts. And we found that there were tens of thousands of examples of uh, cities or schools buying the exact same product and paying different prices. And in some cases, that happened on the very same day. And so, you had one city that bought a 12 pack of markers, Sharpie markers for $8.99. A school district an hour away bought that same pack of Sharpie markers that same day for $28.63. Like, we have a lot of these examples. And in the report, we've got a graph. We just took some of the most popular items that schools and cities were buying and showed the price spread of what they were paying on Amazon, and it's quite dramatic.
It's crazy. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. Crayola markers class pack, 256 count, $58 minimum in one municipality. One school is paying $87. I mean, that's almost $30. Kleenex, $44 difference, $30 or 75. I mean, these dry erase markers, someone's paying $13 for the same thing. Another school district's paying $74. I mean, this is just wild, wild stuff. And what, so I mean, so that's not in the contract. It's just, that's just the dynamic pricing that's on Amazon that these schools are signing up for, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, they're signing contracts and buying on contract. I feel like we have to put that in quotes, right? These
Yeah, they're not,
contracts.
yeah, because there's no
I mean,
real contract. It's just like you get the privilege to log on to Amazon.
right, exactly. And we started to say in the report like these contracts are meaningless, and then we realized, well, they're not actually meaningless. What they do is create the appearance of a vetted, competitively bid public procurement contract. So they create a veneer of accountability when in fact they provide none of the protections that are standard practice in public sector procurement.
Does it
Um,
lock the school district in? So, or is, because does it prevent them from going out and having a relationship with a office supply company or something like that? Is it exclusive contract, or uh, could they theoretically buy it somewhere else? I mean, they're almost certainly not, but I'm just curious if that's another, constraint.
Yeah, the contracts do not specify exclusivity. So, a school district can buy from other suppliers. So you're not locked into doing business with Amazon, but I think the risk is that you've got, you as an employee are told like, here are the contracts that we have. And if one of them's Amazon, it's unclear that the school has any particular reason necessarily to go out and sign other kinds of contracts. And you assume like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be buying stuff. This has been worked out through the kinds of channels that provide oversight when in fact it hasn't.
It's sort of like a layer on top of Amazon Prime. It's like Amazon Prime's there to get you to like more likely to just keep buying it from there. This is like the municipal version. Hey, let's just get a contract that says buy it from us, and we'll lock you, it'll lock you into buying from
Yeah.
us.
And incidentally, while we're on the subject of Prime, if you are buying from Amazon as a school district, you also have to buy Business Prime if you want the shipping included, which, for traditional suppliers in the office supply industry, they've been doing same day and overnight delivery for like 40 years, free. It's part of, it's part of the
Yeah,
service. But with Amazon, you actually have to buy Business Prime, which is about $3,500. And we estimate, or we sort of did the math. If Amazon succeeds in selling Prime to every city, county, and school district in the country, that's $125 million a year, just for being part of Amazon.
that's wild. And what's happening to the, I mean, I remember, I remember you being an expert on these office supply companies, because we talked about this when Staples and Office Depot were trying to merge. What is happening there? I mean, typically they would be the ones getting these contracts. Are they even allowed to bid? I mean, I'm guessing they're bidding and there's just like Amazon just comes in and wins out. But what is what is that industry like right now?
Yeah,
It would seem like it'd be decimated by this type of behavior, but I'm curious
it's
what you're thinking.
shrinking quite rapidly. So independent office suppliers have declined from about 1,200 nationally to about 900 over the last 10 years. Um, and they have shrunk probably even further, maybe in terms of market share. Uh, this is a kind of an invisible network to most consumers because these aren't businesses that typically have storefronts. They operate warehouses and they run delivery trucks and they supply, corporate offices and universities and that kind of thing. And they're often very long-standing businesses within their communities, and they, have a lot of jobs that they support. And they're highly efficient because they have been operating in a world of competitively bid contracts. They are very well honed in terms of their efficiency. So I think it's disturbing to see them, and they say that their number one threat is Amazon's push into this area. We were able to get, sort of using the purchase data that we had from a particular school district in the Rocky Mountain region. We kind of took we went through that and we took, I think it was the top 10 brands, and so we developed a list of about 628 of the most frequently purchased products. It's like big pens and Crayola crayons and all the kinds of things that you might imagine. And we were able to get an independent office supplier in that region to provide uh, their pricing under a current contract that they have with a public sector buyer. And we were able, there's a firm called OP Software that tracks pricing online and office supplies. And we were able to get current Amazon business pricing on these items from them. And we ran a comparison. And the local independent supplier was cheaper on 68% of the items on that list. And they provide a like high level of service. As I said, they pioneered same day delivery long before Amazon existed, and they don't just like dump everything at the front door. Like they come in and put the copy paper in all the copy rooms. I mean, and they're part of the community. Like they do, like we talked to this one El Paso office products in El Paso, Texas. This is really great business. They do these like custom back to school kits for every kid in one of the school districts that they work with. Just like the kind of thing what we should have more of, not less of. And what's really worrisome about the path that we're on is that as schools and cities shift to Amazon, they're killing off the competition. And over time, they're going to become even more dependent on Amazon and therefore even more vulnerable to Amazon's high prices and other kinds of abuses.
I imagine those delivery jobs are real jobs, not like gig economy jobs as well.
Exactly.
So, you've
Yeah.
got real jobs, real, relationship with the community. I mean, it's sad. And, obviously you're probably saving money by going with them. You're getting a better service, you're supporting your local economy, and you're getting a lower cost, I mean, it's amazing that Amazon is able to, just overcome that. And what do you think it is? Is it lobbying? Is it just like apathy? Is it just like just the ease of, familiarity by the school procurement person? They're like, okay, I could just do nothing and click Amazon and like not worry, I'm covered. Or I could do a real RFP, which is like ostensibly more work to like go through the contracts. What was your what's your take on why Amazon is successful at the municipal level?
Hmm. I mean, I think some of what you said about like it's very easy, the familiarity, it's very easy for public sector employees who are buying from Amazon themselves to just kind of default to that, like, oh, I need office paper. I'm going to just go over to Amazon. Um, so there's that kind of that dynamic going on. Amazon has hired a ton of former procurement officials, local government folks. They've hired people who are kind of the folks who do the presentations at the annual procurement conferences, like the folks that are looked to as kind of leaders in the field. And so they have this army of folks out there selling governments into signing up with Amazon, into using Amazon. We looked a lot at their marketing material to local governments, and they make a lot of claims about um, you're going to have access to all this data and information, and they say this is a great way to support your local economy. They have a whole, like, you can buy local because all those local businesses you love can be on Amazon's platform, and you can buy directly from them. Of course, they don't say in any of that marketing material, and by the way, Amazon takes a 50% cut off the top in seller fees, and it's actually not possible for your local businesses to survive, under those kinds of terms. But they make this whole pitch to governments, and they present it as kind of like modernizing, and I think that can seem attractive as well. Like, this is a sort of modernizing way to go. Um, I was also struck as we were working on this by how um, because local governments and schools have been underfunded and understaffed, they are kind of vulnerable. Like, they're in that position where it kind of Amazon's here saying, hey, come do this, and it's like, it seems like an easy path, even if it's the more expensive, less transparent, less accountability, worse for you in the long run, because you're killing the businesses that actually pay the tax revenue that supports the schools, right? So like, it's a bad idea, but it can be expedient it can seem expedient, at least in the short term.
I want to get into um, the product, the problems with Amazon products in a second. But before we get there, did you guys come up with a ballpark number on how much Amazon is effectively, through their pricing, basically stealing from these municipalities and these students? Um, did you come up with like a ballpark figure for that?
Yeah, in terms of the dynamic pricing, it's impossible to really know if these schools and cities insisted that Amazon offer fixed prices, and they did a competitive bidding process. It's hard to know what those numbers would be. But we were able to, and of course, I should also say that our data, while it's fairly extensive, I think we had, for the dynamic pricing analysis, we had, about 300,000 purchases, in many cases of, a fairly small set of items. So we had quite a few price observations, but we only had, as many price observations as we had. But within that context, we were able to say that, had the school districts in our sample consistently gotten the lowest prices in our data, they would have saved about 17%. So, for example, the Denver Public Schools spent about $5.7 million with Amazon Business in 2023. And had they received the lowest prices that we observed on those same products, they would have saved about $1 million.
that is wild. That is really wild. So another aspect of this is Amazon, you know, for people who aren't familiar, is sued pretty frequently for fraudulent goods being sold on their marketplace. You know, you think you're buying one thing and it's a knockoff from China or what have you. Dangerous products, you know, defective products. You know, you've done a lot of work on this. The report goes into that being a problem as well. Can you walk us through, not only are you getting dynamic pricing where you can be paying 17, you know, you can be saving 17% if you just didn't use Amazon. You're also getting ostensibly potentially fraudulent, potentially defective products, right? Walk us through that, because I think that's probably, it just makes it even more ridiculous that they're winning these bids. Ostensibly a municipality, it's one thing if someone is like, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna roll the dice and hopefully I get what I want on Amazon. I mean, they, you know, ideally maybe that wouldn't be something your average citizen would do, but for a municipality, it seems like a huge risk. You put a defective product in a school. I mean, that just seems unconscionable. What was your finding on that front?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's platform is just this wild west, right? It's like all of these unvetted sellers. There's this ever-changing catalog. It is ripe for fraud. You know, it's ripe for counterfeits and, you know, even dangerous products. As you said, there's been a ton of reporting on this, the kinds of things sold on Amazon. And you know, cities and schools are completely vulnerable to this. And again, sort of in contrast to the traditional way that procurement has worked, where you have, you know, a legitimate local supplier or regional supplier who is working directly with the manufacturers of the products, and you're signing a contract just for the items that you actually are going to use. Like, there's not a lot of room to go wrong there. With Amazon, there's a ton of room to go wrong. I mean, we, you know, certainly heard from, you know, we talked to one office supply dealer, for example, who, you know, was seeing that Avery labels were like super cheap on Amazon, and he goes to Avery and he's like, why is it that you're charging me more than I'm seeing on Amazon? And they were like, those are all counterfeit. They're not real. They're not ours. Like, we're not selling to Amazon, but they're just counterfeit. They're labeled Avery and they're not. So there's that kind of a problem, and then it can go into dangerous products as well. And you not only in the context of schools, but you know, you've got cities who are buying stuff for public works departments, who are buying like cleaning supplies, like things that you know, where there are real hazards potentially coming into play. And then the other thing is that this kind of unvetted marketplace opens up the possibility for more risk of employees buying stuff for personal use or things that they, you know, shouldn't be buying. And we found, you know, lots of examples of things that didn't seem like they had any legitimate public purpose, you know, like makeup, clothing. I found a Virginia public university spent about $900 on sex toys, one employee. So and it's like, you know, I can't think of why this is a legitimate, you
Very,
know,
very,
use.
very in-depth sex ed class. I mean, that seems
Yeah,
pretty
right.
implausible. Pretty implausible. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, and there's been quite a bit of reporting and some, you know, court cases, you know, of Little Rock School District, you know, a school administrator pleaded guilty to charging nearly $200,000 of personal items onto the Amazon account. You know, I mean, so this is happening. We're seeing these kinds of cases pop up around the country, illustrating that this is, in fact, a real risk.
I mean, this just strikes me as so problematic on so many levels. You have fraud at the user level, you have fraud in the products, you have higher prices than you're otherwise paying, you're not supporting the local business, which ostensibly you would think would do well in a local procurement. Um, has there been a backlash at all, or is it just like they keep getting more contracts? I mean, um, you would think that this, at some point there would be some learning by the municipalities, but it doesn't seem that way. Is there any response yet, or are we still going in the direction of Amazon winning more business?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly hoping with this report to really shine a spotlight on this. It's, as I said, there's been no real coverage of that any of this stuff is going on. And, it's procurement, which I think people, it sort of seems like a boring topic. And so, I think there is a challenge to get people to look at this. What we're hoping, with publishing this report and work that we're going to be doing in the coming months is that we will have elected officials at the city level stand up and say, this is a bad idea. And in fact, there are a few examples that we found of places where that's happened. And that in doing so, other cities will be looking and going, wait a second, what is going on with our procurement? You mean we've signed contracts that have dynamic pricing, to just really um, raise the alarm about this because I think it's just been happening quietly. I will say just one of the things that's so, and this kind of gets, into kind of competition policy and thinking, and I think illustrates sort of the failures of sort of public policy discourse around competition and monopoly policy. There are as far as we can tell that a lot of school districts seem to think that dynamic pricing actually is the way to get the lowest prices. And I'm sure Amazon, this is what Amazon is telling them explicitly. They are saying, we found in their marketing materials, like, our marketplace has a lot of sellers, therefore it's like a real market and you're naturally getting the lowest price. Even though obviously behind the scenes, Amazon's algorithms are, like a puppet master pulling the strings on who's shown in the buy box, how are prices being manipulated, how the fees on Amazon are driving prices higher. All of that's going on, but they're saying to local officials, this is like a market. You can trust that it's always the lowest prices. And we, found examples in like a Kansas school board meeting, for example, where the administrator was saying, yeah, we always get that. That's the nature of this. We get the lowest prices. And so that kind of myth is something that I think really, we need to overcome.
So would that be, false marketing if they're saying you're always, or I mean, ostensibly was that in the marketing materials that they're always getting the lowest price because it's a market, or was that just something that this school board kind of extrapolated from the, the pitch?
Yeah, it's explicitly in Amazon's marketing material. My guess, and I can try to pull up the quote from our report. We did quote some of this marketing material. My guess is that if you read it, it's been, vetted by a lawyer, to
Yeah.
imply what we're saying, but not say it so explicitly that you get in trouble.
And to maybe talk a little bit more about these communities that have gone a different direction. I always like to think about, like, what is the example here of doing something differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the examples that we found was the city of Tempe in Arizona, which is sort of part of the Phoenix metro. There was a bookstore owner who kind of got wind of Gail Shanks, who owns the Changing Hands bookstore, long-standing local business, and she got wind somewhere. I don't know if it was reported locally that the city was thinking about signing on to a contract with Amazon, and she started making calls and raised a lot of concerns. And the city council member Lauren Kuby, who's now a state rep, she looked at this and said, no way are we doing this." And the city reversed course. They backed out of signing onto that contract, and their purchasing with Amazon plunged. It had been about $200,000 in 2017, and by 2023 it had fallen to about $30,000. And instead, they really refocused on getting their supplies from local suppliers and local dealers. Phoenix, right next door, is another example of a city that buys almost nothing from Amazon and really prioritizes local businesses. So they have an approach where for any contract or any any contract under, I think it's $250,000, they try to get price quotes from at least three local businesses to consider in the mix. And so they've worked really hard to sort of have a pipeline of local suppliers. A lot of the reason for that um, kind of knowledge or perspective or framework within Arizona comes from the fact that their Local First Arizona, it's an organization of about 4,000 independent small businesses across the state that has done a lot of education on this topic and just generally on local economy and why local businesses matter. And so elected officials there are more attuned to this maybe than in other places. We found a few other examples. I mentioned El Paso office products. One of the schools in Texas that they were selling to was approached by Amazon, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we're going to sign on to this Amazon contract." And they said to El Paso office products, "Oh, you can be a seller on Amazon, so we can keep doing business with you." And of course, what Amazon didn't mention to the school district was their nearly 50% fees. And when Sandy Groden, the owner of El Paso Office Products, explained that, the school district went, "Oh, wait a second," and they backed out of that and have continued to do business with him.
And you also have a bunch of policy recommendations for these local and state governments. What do you see? And then let's talk local and state, and then get to federal. What are some of the solutions to going in a new direction here?
Yeah, I mean, we think that dynamic pricing in public sector contracts should be banned. We think states should ban this practice for municipalities, school districts, state agencies. Like this should just not be part of public sector procurement. You should have fixed price contracts and competitive bidding. Um, and we encourage cities to also take a look at how purchasing cards, which are like credit cards, to make sure that there's real transparency in how people are using those. Those are often used for kind of unplanned off contract kinds of expenses. And we found in our research that it's often very difficult to even find out what's being spent under those cards, because you'll just get a line item in the records that says, a payment was made to such and such bank, for this credit card. But it's like, well, what was bought under that credit card and from whom? There's a lack of transparency there, and there needs to be more oversight of how that's happening. And then, we really need to see cities and schools like prioritize competitive bidding and to set spending targets that uh, channel procurement towards local businesses and really make sure that that you're supporting your local economy and that you're creating a healthy competition in the procurement space, so that you're not, in fact, driving towards a monopoly that's going to ultimately further sort of undermine you. We have a whole variety of uh, sort of recommendations around transparency and also encouraging governments to think about developing their own online marketplaces. We could, is some examples that we have in the report of a company called G-Commerce that has set up marketplaces for local governments. They have a one with San Francisco, Long Beach, a few other places in California, and these are platforms where small businesses can sell to the government. It's an online marketplace, so you can sort of sort through and see different kinds of offers, but the fees are much, much, much lower than they are on Amazon. And it's a neutral marketplace. You don't have, the company itself selling on the same marketplace. It's a neutral marketplace. So there are options like that, I think, at the local level that are important.
And I'm constantly dealing with, I have a small company. We got 50 some odd employees, but this ostensibly or could be good for companies as well. Recommendations for how companies do their procurement. If you're looking at how to get better pricing, have less fraud in your procurement process. I mean, does this extend to pretty much any big entity that needs office supplies and similar procurement process to what these municipalities do?
Yeah, you mean like the marketplace, like the G-commerce marketplace? I think that they are. I actually don't know if they have. I think that they are working on
Or
where they
just
may.
your report. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Oh, yeah,
that,
yeah.
well, but just the report generally, it's just like, ostensibly, if they're doing this to your municipality, this is how,
Oh,
you know,
totally.
your
Yeah, if you're
corporate procurement is getting ripped off the same way. I mean, yeah, this is more objectionable because it's stealing from students from their, from money that's going ostensibly supposed to be buying them stuff. Um, but, maybe a slightly less sympathetic cast of characters in your corporate procurement officer, but this is there are lessons in here for them as well. No,
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's an association of independent office suppliers and janitorial, like cleaning supplies, called Workplace Solutions Association, and that's a great place to like find out, do you have a local supplier in your region, and contract with them. You're going to get better prices, better service. It's going to just be a different relationship altogether.
that's super helpful. We have a question from our listeners. So let's go to the listener question here. How should contracts be written to avoid this? We already went through a couple, banning dynamic pricing. What else can someone doing an RFP, writing up a contract, do to avoid this type of ripoff here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you should have fixed price contracts, and competitive bidding, to award those contracts. I think one of the things that this is bringing to mind, that's an aspect of the story that we haven't touched on, is there are these group purchasing organizations, and they're companies that in many cases, in some cases they're nonprofit, but there are also big for-profit companies that are in this space. And group purchasing organizations go back a ways, and they have this sort of legitimate purpose, which is, if you're a busy school district, you don't necessarily have time to do an RFP process for all of your supplies. And so the idea is like you can be part of a network of school districts where another school district has gone through that process, and you can say, oh, this is a competitively bid vetted contract. We'll just piggyback on that, and we won't have to do the process ourselves. So that's what group purchasing organizations facilitate. But what has happened is that there are these for-profit entities, and in particular a company called Omnia Partners, which is a private equity backed company that has rolled up a ton of these group purchasing organizations, and now is like the 800-pound gorilla in this space. They dominate it. They count 150,000 local agencies as part of their member network. And they have been the sort of ally of Amazon's in this whole thing. And so, um, you know, there are two contracts that Amazon has with them. One that was originally created through a school district in Virginia, and another one with the state of Utah. And so what happens is like the state of Utah negotiates that contract with Amazon. It includes dynamic pricing and the other things that we've been talking about. And then Omnia Partners picks it up and adds it to its catalog. And agencies across the country then sign on, often under the assumption that this is a truly vetted thing. And so it's unclear like how much they are really looking at the details of what this is about. Omnia gets a cut of every dollar that goes through one of these Amazon contracts. And so the basic deal is like they kind of offer this veneer of accountability, and like they're a known entity. And Amazon's army of salespeople go out and peddle these contracts, and everybody profits, or they both profit at the expense of schools and cities in that context. And so we are really hoping that elected officials, at the federal and state level in particular, will start to question, take a look at what is going on with these group purchasing organizations, and particularly Omnia Partners.
And another question here: is there anything to do about this corruption? Where Amazon is, I think there's talking about where Amazon is hiring the officials, you know, at the state level. Are they doing that at the federal level too? I imagine they are. We've done some reporting on that in the past, but I'm curious. Is that going on
Yeah.
at the federal level also? What to do about this corruption issue where the procurement officials are being hired and then, you know, sort of engaging on behalf of Amazon to get these contracts?
Yeah, I mean, when Amazon first set its sights on going into public sector procurement, they made their first big move in 2016 when they hired Anne Rung, who had been the top procurement official in the Obama administration. So they brought her on board, and that was the beginning of this whole revolving door thing that they've been doing. Yeah, I mean, I think this obviously speaks to some, accountability around, where public officials go, but also I think, it's on us to demand that our local governments do better, and that they not be hoodwinked into this. My colleague Kennedy Smith, who as I mentioned before, did a lot of this data gathering and research. Um, she's a senior researcher here at ILSR, and she's written a citizens guide, which is linked to from the same page as the report. And so it's like, if you want to go find out, like, we're going to walk you through the steps of like, is your school district buying from Amazon? How you can get that information, and then here's a set of steps you can take to then say to your school board, or your city, like, you need to get out of this, and here's why. And so we have a step-by-step instruction guide for doing that.
And, you know, I have one last question here. We were talking about how what can municipalities and the federal government do to sort of facilitate more, you know, fair procurement, more competitive procurement. Is there a role for the Postal Service in this potentially? I mean, obviously, right, the way it is now, they give volume discounts to Amazon, so they basically preference Amazon, and Amazon just basically leeches off of the Postal Service to sort of, extend their network and have the Postal Service take on unprofitable routes and things like that. But if you're looking at, there's reporting and that Amazon's walking away, the Postal Service, from their contract with the Postal Service. I question whether or not they're really willing to do that. But let's say the Postal Service calls their bluff and says, yeah, fine, we'll go out on our own. Does that create an opportunity to actually have an alternative, procurement platform, or have the Postal Service come in and, create an opportunity for small business to compete on a level playing field with Amazon more broadly than just at the office supply level, where there is that, expertise and same day delivery already?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I know that the Postal Service does offer, I think it's sort of under marketed, but they do offer this kind of local package delivery service if it's within the same city. And so it's interesting to think about how that could potentially be expanded, and could be a way for governments, as you said, like when it's not something like office supplies where you have a contract because you're buying a lot of that sort of stuff, but you have these one-off kinds of needs, and you could potentially use that to buy from, local retail businesses, within your city, and have it delivered, and be able to bypass Amazon. I think that would be a great idea. I think generally speaking, the Postal Service is a potentially really powerful, set of infrastructure for addressing Amazon's monopoly power by creating a real alternative.
Anything else that you had in the report that you want to talk about? I mean, there's a lot in there. You spent years looking into these types of things. I know the dynamic pricing was the sort of driver of the headlines here. Particularly if you've already gotten feedback, if some people have already reached out to you and said, hey, we want to, we want to fix our contracts, or anything that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. We are planning an event, a virtual event, probably in February, that will have some local officials who've rejected Amazon and other speakers. And so we are hoping now that this is out in the world to, reach more local elected officials and other folks working in cities and schools. And so would love to get folks to that event because it'll be real, they'll be able to hear from their peers about ways to address this and ways to adopt different policies that really support the local economy and support competition. um, I will also say that what's happening at the federal level is disturbing. We've got the General Services Administration, which is a sort of hub for procurement at the federal level. The Trump administration is steering even more procurement through GSA now. That's their policy, and GSA created this commercial platforms program, many years ago, and this has been under, it's been bipartisan. Amazon, during the first 2 years of that pilot, Amazon captured 96% of the spending on the commercial platform, done by federal agencies. So we have a number of recommendations in the report, and we're hoping to see folks at the federal level run with some of these things. For example, right now, agencies that buy from a small business that's a third-party seller on Amazon, they get to count that toward the 23. There's a requirement at the federal level that agencies direct 23% of their spending towards small businesses. So they buy off Amazon and they get to count it as small business spending, even though Amazon's taking a 50% cut and is really the one profiting from that. So we have a set of recommendations. Like, at this point, Amazon is, in terms of selling commercial products, is still relatively small at the federal level, but it is dominating this pilot, and like the writing is on the wall in terms of where that could go if there isn't real intervention.
Is there any timing around like when that pilot is supposed to be expanded, or is that, sort of an in-depth, it's sort of an ongoing thing?
Yeah, I misspoke a little bit in the sense that the pilot is over. It was a 3-year pilot. There's data that's made public for the first 2 years. And so now we've moved into this other phase, and the government has brought in other commercial platforms. So it is a bit more diverse in terms of the participant companies participating. But what isn't clear is whether any of those other companies are actually getting much in the way of sales. And so one of the things that we've called for in the report is some type of cap. So the federal government says not, no single commercial platform can capture more than X% of the total spending in this commercial platforms program. We also point out that the federal government has something called GSA Advantage, which is a public platform for multiple vendors. And, people say it's, a little cumbersome. I mean, there are things that could be modernized or improved about it, but we should do that. We should invest in improving it because it's a neutral platform that companies can participate in without Amazon becoming this kind of monopoly gatekeeper between federal buyers and businesses that want to sell to government, sucking out a huge percentage of the revenue. Like, that makes no sense. We should make an investment in the public platform.
There is this, when it comes to procurement, I mean, we've done this with defense contracting where there are there are integrity rules, right? Rules to ensure that it is competitively bid contract. And that's a process, right? Getting bids, that is a process. Go reading the contracts, that's a process. Like reviewing the contract, and for making sure your lawyers take a look at specific clauses and things like that. So procurement can be a cumbersome process no matter what. And it's funny to me that none of the benefits, a lot of the times when you talk to a procurement official, they just wave away those benefits and they're like, look, I just want, to click,
Right.
buy or what have you. And it's just like there's been a sort of intellectual loss of the benefits of having a program with robust integrity measures in this sort of pursuit of almost the illusion of efficiency. Like I can just get the best result really quickly this way, and you lose out on all those other things. And so I think that's how you end up in some respects with this bad outcome that your report goes into. Higher prices, ripping off students, fraud in the system, and we're back to how do we come up with some integrity rules to ensure that we get what we want, get a good deal for our citizens. So I'm excited about your event here in February. I look forward to that. This paper was absolutely amazing. I'm actually kind of jealous that you got all this information. We've tried to get this information in the past. We've had a tough time. Your team, I'm impressed. They were able to put it all together. Kudos to them. Amazing work. And thank you so much for doing this, Stacy.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here with you, and you all are amazing in the reporting you do. So it's really nice to have a chance to be on the podcast.
Thank you, Stacy. And thanks to everyone for joining the call today. This concludes the call. Bye-bye.